I think for many of us who are concerned about the situation in Ukraine and what has happened at the Valdai conference, in which our friend Gilbert Doctorow was reporting that the elites are not happy with the way that Putin was warning the West, and he was not that much mm, how influential, that much solid in his sort of message toward the West. How, Graham, let me start with you. Do you think that he need to be more aggressive toward the West, in your opinion? Is that going to be helpful for his position? I'm talking about the Putin's position in the war in Ukraine.
Right. Well, the whole remarks made by Professor Doctoral, I have great respect for him. By the way, that doesn't mean that I or we always agree with him, but he's a remarkable and insightful and knowledgeable commentator. But I was stunned to hear him essentially more than once, maybe three times, support the position that maybe it was really time for Vladimir Putin to step down because he has failed to meet Russia's strategic needs in the way he's conducting the war by being far too cautious and giving in to Western pressures. And he suggested that there are quite a number of people within the Kremlin. And it's interesting that we can talk about these things in Russia today. This is not Stalin's Russia. But anyway, yeah, I was also puzzled by what he was doing. We can argue about whether he's right or not right, but for it seems almost like Gilbert is, who, as I say, I have great respect for, is almost aligning himself with certain groups within the Kremlin on the conduct of Russian foreign policy. And that surprises me. And it has all kinds of other implications. People who say, this proves that Russia's losing the war, or others who say, look, we've all along said Putin is very cautious. Uh, every single various political position can be justified by this argument, including the fact that we should double down ourselves because Putin is losing now. You know, it's a very pregnant position, if you will, to be taking in this debate.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ray. Your take.
Yeah, I've known Gil for many years, and I share what Graham just said about my respect for his acumen. On this particular one, I don't agree. I think Gil is taking what he's seeing on these TV shows, which are becoming more hard line. At least last week they were, and kind of thinking, well, maybe there is something to what other people have speculated that Putin is going too slow, that the military can't abide by his appeasing Donald Trump, okay, and that therefore he might be overthrown. Well, there's not really a lot of evidence to that. When I looked at the Valdai thing and pretty much read the whole thing, uh, Putin exudes confidence. He's got a good sense of humor. He's clearly in charge, and there's very, very little in any of his remarks to suggest that he feels a little defensive or, sure, he says every now and then, we're not naive and we're not going to be taken advantage of. Well, yeah, all right, he's going to say that anyway. So my notion is that Putin really is on a roll. He's made very clear that he gives priority to developing a decent relationship with the United States, that Ukraine is a lesser issue, a subordinate issue. So are things like the US bombing the hell out of Iran the first time. Don't quote me on the second time, okay? So, he even said right up, or Piskov, I guess, said, look, that's on a different plane from our continuing attempt to improve relations with the United States. And, just to finish up on this, the Tomahawk missile issue, is something that people are, I think, overdoing. When the judge asked me about this first time, I said, not going to happen. And I just vaguely remembered that most of the ones, at least the ones that were able to carry nuclear weapons, had already been destroyed under the INF Treaty. And then I, didn't really know, but I didn't think there are very many tomahawks left. They're sort of old, and they're for navies. And Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Ukraine doesn't have a navy, and for them to put it in some ground-based thing, or so I checked with some real experts who know a lot more than I do. Scott Ritter, for example, and he says, yeah, it would take years for them to do this, and they'd have. Well, the understanding, of course, is we wouldn't sell them to Ukraine. Oh, that's not the idea now. You sell them to the Europeans, right? And the
Yeah.
Europeans don't have enough money, but they'll buy them anyway. And but by the time they buy them, then they'll give the Ukrainians don't have many people to man them. And so when Putin is asked about this, and he said specifically, not the follow-up question, but part of the first question, well, how do you react to this? He's going to say, of course, well, I mean, the attackums didn't do much. They're not going to change the course of the war. But in answer to your question, if subjunctive case, if that were to happen, then the light at the end of the tunnel that we've been seeing with respect to improved relations with the U.S., man, or that would be really a casualty of this.
Yeah.
If okay. Now, Lavrov has
But
said there's no final decision on that, and there isn't any final decision. I suspect that Putin and the others are second back channeling this. They're in contact, and that our people, perhaps Witkoff or even Rubio, are saying, "Look, this is just a sop to the Europeans. They want some earnest of our intentions to defend Europe. So we'll throw out we'll throw out it. We'll talk about the tomahawk, which is totally unrealistic in technical
yeah.
terms as well as political terms."
Okay, but Ray, don't you find it a bit surprising that of all times, while Europe at this point is in virtually a state of hysteria, there's hardly any better word I can choose to describe these governments that are reeling on the verge of collapse, some of them virtually collapsing, huge pro-Palestinian demonstrations that are threatening the regime. They don't have any money. And here they are suggesting maybe that they should spend more money on defense, Germany and all of it. That's the last thing that Europe needs. I'm amazed at this point that that Gilbert should be proposing this idea that maybe Putin is beginning to lose it, that he's becoming too soft. I would think this is just throwing, I don't know, what would you call it? Uh, Oil on hot flames in Europe to be introducing this idea. It may be saying, look, we can win. Putin's about to fall. It's what we've been saying all along. I was just very, very startled. I don't want to make this too much just about Gilbert Doctorow, but it's quite remarkable that he is making these comments and associating himself as a non-Russian with this cause. I find striking.
Yeah.
Well, he sort
And
of is he is a
no,
Russian. I mean, he's an
no,
American, but he's from a long line of Russian distinguished people.
Right.
Now I know Gil well enough to be very quite sure that whatever alignment his views lend themselves to, that this is honest. I mean, that he's looking at these people, and he's impatient himself, perhaps, And when he sees Putin acting less strongly than Gil Doctorow thinks, it's easy to get impatient. Craig Roberts is of the same persuasion. There's other people. So I have no doubt that he's honestly come to this
Oh
conclusion,
yeah,
whether
yeah.
they align themselves with other things or not. It is disturbing that Europe is in such disarray, but that's part of the reason for this. It seems to me I don't believe everything Lavrov says, or even what Putin said at Valdai, but they explain this stuff by saying, well, the Europeans are in such trouble, they need a diversion. I mean, not only tomahawks, but seizing tankers that they say have Russian oil in them. Come, give me a break. That's piracy. I mean, there's one guy trying to be Napoleon, for God's sake. He's not even as tall as Napoleon. He doesn't say that, but so he seems thoroughly relaxed. Now it could be. You always have to allow, as you said before, Graham, for 100 flowers to bloom, and contending views to contend. But you know, if well, if this plays out the way it's supposed to, and the Russians are winning, and then the big fly in the ointment will be people like Kellogg and others, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, apparently, that have been telling Trump just the opposite, that the Russians are losing. My God, sooner or later, it'll become apparent on the ground that they've been giving him a foul line, just as Bill Burns and his predecessors gave presidents a foul line because that's what they wanted to hear, that is, the president. So it could lead to all kinds of mischief. But as far as Putin is concerned, maybe he's too naive. Maybe he doesn't understand things that Gil does. I don't think there's much likelihood of that, but we have to allow for that possibility.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but Europe just seems to be the most dangerous and like a mad dog at this point, and particularly MI6 with all of these false flag things and attacks in the Baltics and drones here, drones there, and most Europeans, most I guess world viewers tend to believe it because it's you have to do a lot of work to think about what false flags are all about. But it seems to me an extraordinary moment to be introducing this idea that Putin maybe is weak and losing his position. And in my view, anyway, whether it's right or wrong, it plays into the hands of those who have been chanting all along that Putin is about to lose the war and on the point of being fired or collapse.
I think the whole point, Ray and Graham, I think the whole point of Paul Carrick Roberts and Doctorow is that Russia should define some sort of conditions for the West that they, just make them avoiding any escalation in the conflict in Ukraine in order to avoid the escalation. The whole point is to deter just what would happen if something big happens in terms of false flag operation, attacks on Russia with Tomahawk missiles. Just imagine hitting one of the big cities in Russia and killing many people. That would hugely escalate the situation between Russia and the West. The whole point is this. Today I talked with Paul Carrick Robert. He said he's concerned about the use of nuclear weapons as time goes by with the conflict going on and on. But after all, they're asking for some sort of red lines being defined by the Russian president. I don't see that's the attitude of the Russian president. Putin avoid defining any red lines so far. As I remember, if I'm not mistaken, so far the only time that I've heard him defining a red line was about the Taurus missiles from Germany going to Ukraine. Not more than that, anything else. Because when you put out your red lines, you don't control the situation.
That's
They can
right.
escalate the situation. You can have your red lines privately, and you say, if they pass those red, I'm going to react. But you're not going to put it out for those people who want to cross the red lines.
Exactly. No, I think you're absolutely right on that, Nima. So, but I mean, I think this has raised the level of danger to a new and much higher level than we've seen in weeks anyway. And I would come back to my remark that I think Europe is proving to be amazingly irresponsible and irrational, if not hysterical, in handling this. And maybe, as Dr. O himself argues, if Russia does not move more decisively, then perhaps his enemies will feel that they can take even greater liberties and push further and provoke further.